Welcome to the Feisty Women's Performance Podcast. I'm your host, Sara Gross, Ironman champion, Ph.D. in women's history, and founder and CEO of Feisty Media. I started this show because I wanted to cut through the BS of diet culture and fitness culture and actually learn from high-achieving women at the top of their game who have figured out how to feel and perform their best at every stage of life. So I chat with experts, elite athletes, and leaders who have learned to succeed despite the massive gender data gap in exercise and medical science and product development. Every episode is filled with information, advice, and anecdotes that will help you fulfill your potential as an athlete, mom, leader, or business owner. And listen up. If you don't subscribe to our Women's Performance newsletter, you are definitely missing out. It's totally free. So head over to womensperformance.com and subscribe now. That's womensperformance.com. This podcast is a production of Feisty Media. Hey Feisties, welcome to a very special episode of the Women's Performance Podcast. It's been a while. And I am super stoked to come back to recording and producing an episode of the Women's Performance Podcast every week starting in November. But for today, Feisty is kicking off a campaign called Fueled is Fast. So producers Carrie and Millie and I decided to put together this special episode of the Women's Performance Podcast with Dr. Katie Schofield. As you'll hear, Katie's academic work and personal story are super closely intertwined. And we get to talk to her about how she overcame RED-S, relative energy deficiency syndrome, and she fought her way back onto New Zealand's track cycling team, and then got to compete in a world champs again at the top of her game. And after that, Katie set her sights on academic study to help understand what happened to her and so many female athletes when we don't fuel properly. And if you're one of those people who is loving Molly's podcast, The Business of Fitness, as much as I am, don't worry. She will still have an episode coming out this Thursday and every Thursday henceforth. In November, Molly's podcast is going to have its own feed. So we are going to be telling you how and when to subscribe over there if you're a keen listener of that podcast, which I will definitely be subscribing. And then I'm going to come back and we're going to start episodes of the Women's Performance Podcast again. And we're going to talk about optimizing women's health and performance for sport and life. So today's show is part of Feisty's Fueled is Fast campaign powered by Fuelin. Over the next couple of weeks, you will find a ton of content is being produced around the conversation of fueling properly as a female athlete. So we talk about everything from sort of eating disorders to low energy availability and RED-S and what they are and how to avoid them, and also how to eat properly to fuel our training and feel good and ultimately thrive. Those themes will thread through all of our podcasts. And additionally, you'll find educational blogs on womensperformance.com and feistymenopause.com. And we'll also be sharing information on social media with one of our partners, Faster, which is a Stanford University program focused on studies and education on female athletes. And our partner, Fuelin, on November 3rd, we'll be hosting a webinar that you'll be able to sign up for and attend to get further information on all of these topics, and watch out for information on how to sign up for that. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Katie Schofield. Katie holds a Ph.D. in sports science. She's a sports nutrition and performance consultant who works with many athletes in all different sports. She's a former New Zealand elite athlete in track cycling. And I love the way her personal journey through sport is tied so closely to her academic journey. So let's hear from Katie. For decades, running shoes have been researched, tested, and designed for men. Brands have relied on the shrink it and pink it approach to sell male shoes to female customers. That's why we are so excited to be working with RED-S. RED-S designs athletic footwear for women that elevates performance, safety, and style. RED-S unlocks the science behind women's biomechanics through dedicated research, creates better shoes for women that support their longevity and performance, and establishes new design standards to promote transparency in a male-biased industry. HED-S have a lower ankle collar to reduce rubbing, a breathable mesh toe box to allow for ventilation and to allow for female toe shape, a special kind of plate in the midsole to keep tired legs going, a narrow heel cup to reduce heel slippage and take the pressure off our Achilles, and a rounded instep to create a snug fit. HED-S has 3 shoe models designed for different sessions: the Alma Cruise for long runs, the Alma Tempo for training days, and the Alma Speed for pushing the pace. I've personally been running in the Alma Cruise and I love them. It's the shoe I always wanted and never knew I needed. The fit is perfect in every way. You can get your own pair of HED-S at hedas.com and use the code FEISTY20 for 20% off. That's FEISTY20 at hedas.com, and it will all be in the show notes. Endurance sports should be accessible to everyone, right? That's why we are so excited to be partnering with Motive. Motive is one of the fastest growing training apps in the world today, with thousands of amateur athletes signing up every month and a nearly perfect 4.9 star rating in the App Store. You are not a template, and your training plan should not be either. Prepare for running races, triathlons, cycling events, duathlons, or swim runs, however your season schedule shapes up, and get training written by some of the best coaches in the world in each discipline who know what it takes to help amateur athletes reach their goal on race day. The app takes the training written by those experts and then creates the most optimal training plan for your schedule, abilities, and goals. Plus, the training is fully customized to your race schedule, how much you can train each week, your current abilities, and the goals you want to achieve in your race. You can use the app for free as long as you want, or get all the upgraded features from the app for just $19.99 a month. But as a Feisty listener, you can sign up at mymotive.com and use the code FEISTY for 2 months of full premium access. That's right, you get 2 months of premium for free. So you quite literally have nothing to lose. So head over to mymotive.com, mymotiv.com, and use the code FEISTY, FEISTY. And on a personal note, I know the founder of Motive, and he is driven to make triathlon and all endurance sports more accessible for the athletes who care about their performance but who aren't quite ready for a full-time personal coach. If that sounds like you, definitely try the app for 2 months for free. You literally have nothing to lose. Katie, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks. Super cool to be here.
Yeah, good to see you. So you're coming to us, just so I get the story right. You live in a van, as I understand. You're living van life, which is a dream for a lot of people, I think. And you're somewhere in New Zealand. Am I right about that?
Yeah, that's correct. I am in a van. I'm currently in Cambridge, New Zealand, which is a small country town, but it's actually growing. So it's in the kind of middle of the North Island. To put that into perspective. But yeah, van life's going well. I've been in it for just over a year now, so it's been an interesting journey.
Yeah, for sure. And how often do you move around? Like, how long have you been in Cambridge right now?
So I've actually been in Cambridge. This will be my 8th year, but the last year I've been bouncing around from coast to coast, going north and going south, and just doing work on the road and coming back to Cambridge for a little bit of work that I had a prior commitment to. So yeah, haven't ventured much or as far as probably I should have, but yeah, it's still been fun.
Cool. Well, that's exciting. Good for you. Good for you actually doing it. I love it. Okay, I want to start just to talk a little bit about your story because I know you were an elite cyclist, but I don't think even I haven't heard the full story of sort of your career. And I know that you struggled a little bit with LEA and RED-S. And so I'd just love to hear, like, first of all, your experience as an athlete, let's start from the beginning. Like, you became an elite cyclist. What was your process?
I'll go back a little bit in terms of I used to do track and field. That was like my bread and butter, and that's what I was aiming, to go to pinnacle events and race the 100 meters. I'm a sprinter, so don't ask me to do anything more than 200 because it's no fun. But I broke my knee when I was 12, and that is an injury that kind of plagues my whole, you know, athletic career, and still to this day I have to manage that. But with running, obviously with the impact and the deacceleration it's required, my knee just wasn't that happy. And so my strength and conditioner at the time said, "Hey, Katie, I think you should really try track cycling because you've got the power. The training crossover is very similar." He had connections with someone who was in the national squad, and that guy then took me under his wing and taught me basically everything I knew, which was fantastic. And to put that into kind of a timeline, that happened kind of midway through my university. So you kind of like early 20s, mid 20s, I started track cycling. And so that's very late. So having to learn the process of pedaling, foreign concept, it seems simple, but it actually takes a couple of years to get the pedaling efficiency
Oh,
right.
yeah.
Yeah, and so I finished my studies in Dunedin, and then I decided to move 2 hours south to the bottom of New Zealand, which is a pretty cold area. But that at that time, that was the only indoor velodrome in New Zealand, and there was a nice little hub there that I joined, and basically decided, right, well, I'll work, but I'll train like I'm a full-time athlete to try get into the national squad. And then 2 years forward, got into the national squad, which was great, got to travel overseas and compete. And then I was invited to come up to Cambridge, where I am now, because that's where there was the start of a centralised program where there's kick-ass facilities here. There's a great velodrome here, high performance centre, where you have access to gym and you have access to healthcare providers, and it's such a good hub here. So yeah, I moved up in January, and then I guess my performances around that time were kind of plateauing, and they were looking at my progression, in the last 6 months to a year, and I hadn't actually progressed. So at that time, they decided, "Katie, we're not going to renew your contract." So I was out of the New Zealand team, which was gutting, like you've spent 2 years to get in there, and you race with the team for a couple of years, and then all of a sudden it's like nothing. So it was at that point in time where I was like, okay, I'm either going to retire because I was quite an older athlete at that time, or is there something still left in me which I feel I haven't quite tapped into? And it was the latter. So I had to make some tough calls. I had to create a whole new support network around me to find training facilities.
Because you're not supported by the national team anymore, right? So you're like going it on your own, essentially. Yeah.
Yeah. Had to find extra work to help fund just my living. But it was also at that time when I took a step out of the environment. I was like, I know I should not be this tired, and I know there's some health things that I need to get sorted, because if I'm obviously not going well in my performance, and I knew like a couple of years earlier stuff was not right, but I just put it down to training. I was just training. I'm an elite athlete. I should be tired.
I should be tired.
You know,
Yeah. So,
I was told about, not having a menstrual cycle was okay because you're an athlete. So it was those things. And with my studies, I knew I should be having my period and my menstrual cycle. But when you're in the environment and it's high pressure, you're competing all the time against your peers, you want to be onto it. You don't want to then go, oh, actually, I really should address this problem, because that's almost way harder to do than just to ignore it.
mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I guess if we can delve into that a little bit more if you want, but basically what happened, I took the year out of the high performance environment, got some support with the goal to get back into the team. And then it took me till the end of the year to show that I was healthy and that I was actually performing way better than what I had been, which was great, which got me back into the team. And then, stayed with the team for another year and a half before I retired.
Right. And so so your symptoms, as I'm understanding, were mostly like fatigue and loss of period. So by the end of that year, once you realized, did you get your period back in that time frame?
Yes and no. It would come back,
Mm-hmm.
and then I would lose it again, and then it would come back, and I'd lose it again. And I'd say like maybe, so when I was out of the team, that was 2014. We're now 2022. I would say only in the last year to year and a half, my cycle is now like bang on every month.
Right. Interesting.
Probably didn't help that when I finished retirement that I went and I got dared to do a body sculpting competition, which was not a good idea. So that also ruined my menstrual cycle.
Right.
So,
Just layer it up.
Another random fact.
Okay. And so to go back just a step here, just for our audience too, like, would you have said that you were in a state of LEA and RED-S, and what are those things and how are they different?
Yes, 100%. I was definitely in LEA and I did have RED-S, and that's what was my diagnosis in 2014. And that's kind of when I learnt about RED-S. So what is RED-S? We're talking about relative energy deficiency in sport, or you might also hear it as relative energy deficiency syndrome. You could say RED-S or REDS, it doesn't really matter. It's potato situation. But what RED-S is, it's a syndrome that impairs the physiological function of a range of body systems. So, I talked about menstrual cycles, so it can impact menstrual function. It can impact bone health. It also impacts your metabolic and your endocrine system. And immunity can be impaired. So there's a whole range of body systems that can be impacted by RED-S.
Mm-hmm.
And RED-S is caused by low energy availability. And so I'll just delve into what low energy availability is. So that's when you have limited amount of energy available after exercise is accounted for normal physiological functioning. So if anyone's heard me talk previously, I liken it to when your phone is on low battery. And when your phone's on low battery, it's like, oh gosh, I need to save as much energy as possible in the phone. So I might shut down apps. I might put it on flight mode to save the energy that's left over for the phone to do its essential function of calling someone in an emergency. That's very similar to your body. So when you're not having enough energy on board, the body will shut down systems that are non-essential, like your menstrual cycle, like gut function, to save energy just to survive and breathe, make your heart pump, make your body move. And it's almost like it'll steal energy from a non-essential system so that you can exercise, but actually it's detrimental to your health. Hopefully that's clear.
That's very clear. Thank you. Yeah. Did you feel like there was pressure for you to like eat less for performance purposes, or did you feel social pressures around that? Or what do you think were the factors that went into like leading you to that place where you were not taking in enough energy?
Yeah, I think it was very multifactorial, and that's the thing with RED-S, LEA. It's so complex, and there's a lot of things that's going on, not only just physically, but like you say, social pressures, social media, things like that. For me, it was myself. I'm very much that type A personality, perfectionist, very numbers driven. So when you see a number of power to weight that you want to be hitting 20 watts per kg, you know, I knew how to manipulate that. It's like, it makes sense to me. I can get lighter. But it's also, that's where we can get into a dangerous point when you don't do it properly. But also it was just understanding how much energy I really needed for my training. And it's almost with sprinting, it can be quite hard to determine that, because you might be at the track for 3 hours, but you do 4 efforts, and those efforts are maximal, but they might only be for 20 seconds. So it's kind of like, well, I actually haven't done much. But you really have, because with sprinting, it's not just the energy that you put in and expend, the energy that you expend when you're going hard. There is also the energy that you expend after your effort is still quite high. And I think a lot of power and sprint athletes maybe underestimate that. So yeah, I am expending a lot of energy, even though I'm not out for a consistent 3-hour road ride.
Mm-hmm. Right. And it's interesting, like one thing, and we'll talk about this more like throughout the campaign, but that like LEA can show up in a lot of different ways. So I think sometimes we associate it with like someone having significant mental health problems with disordered eating and eating disorders full blown, which can be the case, right? But sometimes it's not. Right? Like sometimes it's just someone trying to perform as an elite athlete and essentially doing what they're told to do by coaches and other advisors.
Exactly. Yeah. So yeah, it could be LEA created from intentional means. So like what you're talking with, disordered eating behaviors or disordered eating, where, individuals are purposely not eating, or they're using diuretics, or they're purging, things like that. Whereas I see I would say 80% of the athletes that I work with, it's just they're just unaware of how much food they actually need to eat, or there are a few diet trends that they follow, and then they end up falling into low energy availability. And I guess it's also important to raise that, yes, you might have a range of symptoms, but everyone is going to vary on the scale of the severity of their symptoms. So yes, I lost my menstrual cycle, but for some other people it might be totally fine, but they might have really bad gut issues. So that's what makes RED-S really complex, really exciting for me from a research perspective, but I guess that's where the medical professionals are really, clued up on how to diagnose this properly, because it's not just a blood test that you need to look at.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so since you brought up your research, let's talk about that for a second. So you did decide eventually to do a PhD in this area, right? What was and I know you took a multidisciplinary approach, which I love, looking at like the social, cultural, psychological pieces as well as the physiology. So tell us about that project.
Yeah, so my PhD came through my own personal experience. One, because RED-S was so new when I was diagnosed with it, and I was like, oh, I'm going to do some reading about this, and having the understanding of the female athlete triad, where you have underfueling, menstrual function, and bone health. That's kind of where the main pillar lies with female athlete health. But what RED-S does is expand those three pillars and adds those other body systems which can be impacted by low energy availability. So I loved that framework because yes, I did have gut issues. Bone health was fine, but yeah, I had menstrual function issues. I had brain fog, things like that. So I was like, oh, this makes so much more sense to me. And also what I really enjoyed about the RED-S framework was that included male athletes too. So I was like, this is great because we can't forget about the males. So with having more reading and understanding of that, I really found a gap. I guess a gap in terms of other people around me not really having an understanding of what was going on. So for me to go through that process and then explain what's happening and how I can actually get better, I was like, oh, more people need to know about this. But also what I found through all my reading was so much was being done on the physical part of the body, so physiology, like what's happening in bloods, what's happening on the bone, what's happening with menstrual function. But there's this whole other aspect that I was really grappling with, was the environment I was in, the pressures of myself, but also others, and how that played a massive part in how I was feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And there was not much, well, no, I shouldn't say there was not much, but there was a lot of literature around pressures in sport on body image, but none of them were dovetailing together. And that's where my PhD comes into fruition, because I wanted to overlay the experiences of athletes with LEA and RED-S with the whole physiological aspects to see if they connected or disconnected. So it was a big project. I used a bunch of cyclists, and I used male and female, but I guess most of my papers and stuff are on the female athletes, because that was just more, I guess, the more stuff that came out of that. Yeah.
And so what were the things that you found? Like, what would you say are the main learnings from your PhD or from research you've done since?
Yeah, it's probably not so much the results, but more how I went about it. It was very novel. So what did I learn? That LEA and RED-S is way more complex than what I thought. What I learned in terms of like data, we did see that there was over 60% of the athletes were in low energy availability that I tested.
And are these elite level? These are elite level cyclists that you were testing?
Yeah. So I had over 2/3 of them presenting with LEA in some form.
Mm-hmm.
And then in terms of the social psychological aspects, just found like how a few of the athletes, some of the messages that they were given when they were younger, even if it was before they were in the team or even if they were in a team, for example, someone saying, they're at the dining hall of a competition and, someone senior to them has gone, do you need that much food on your plate? Kind of questioning their food intake. And that really stuck with one of the athletes, and other comments from others about how they looked in skin suits, and then they just feel uncomfortable to be in their skin suits because of someone that it was just one comment that someone said that just triggered, and I have similar things. I'm not sure, Sarah. Have you had similar comments said to you that just kind of stick and you're like, gosh,
Yeah,
yeah,
especially if it plays off of something that you're already self-conscious about, And I think even
exactly.
as like the way I look back on it is like and I've just watched my daughter also go through puberty, right?
Mm.
And like we go from these like tiny childish bodies, these women's bodies very, very quickly, right? And before you even realize like where you've put on weight and why and what your body's doing, someone's making a comment, about
Yeah.
like how much you've changed, or you're getting big, or your hips are big, or something like this. Or sometimes even the size of your breasts, which is just even another level of terrible. But but like I do remember comments, because like I'm like naturally like I have like hip, like I carry weight on my butt and on my hips, and I remember comments about that kind of thing. Like even like harmless people who are, it's not harmless because I remember them, but like people who are not intending anything bad, you know, like my mom, for example, just like, oh, well, that's just your body. Like no conversation at all about puberty and what changed and why I'm experiencing my hips to be suddenly way bigger. Right. So I think, yeah, I just think to some extent, like I'm almost a little bit surprised that it only came out as 60% of the cyclists that had symptoms of LEA. Like if I look back on my triathlon career, like at some point, it's hard because sometimes you're not even trying. Like sometimes you're not even trying to restrict your food. You're just like, you just can't eat enough and you don't understand what that looks like, what eating enough might look like. So I think almost everyone I know would have had some point at which they were not consuming enough calories to keep up with the training they were doing.
Yeah, and I mean it's common. It does happen, especially when you're in a high training block. But I guess with these athletes that went through my study, they were kind of like, oh gosh, right, okay, now I can eat more. It was almost like gave them permission to eat more, because it's when you look at the data and some of them can kind of see how far away they are from what they should be fueling with. It's kind of like a wake-up call. But the everyday athlete doesn't have access to all the equipment and the testing, so it's a big education piece for sure.
Yeah. How did you personally recover? I know I've talked to a couple of people for whom it was really difficult to actually sort of put on the weight they needed to get their period back, or there's like this difficult in between time where you have to kind of force more calories in. What was that whole process for you?
Yeah, it was a challenging process, I will admit. I was fortunate that I surrounded myself with a really good support team, one with an amazing endocrinologist. So I was fortunate that I could have access to that, because I understand not everyone can. I was working with a sports psych who continued to work through with me, which was really nice. And I would say those were the two main people that really helped me recover. I would say it was more of a mind shift for me, going through the elite sport, always on performance. At that time, we were kind of governed funding on our world ranking. So every year it's kind of quite intense
So
of
much pressure.
like I need to perform because I need to get a paycheck type mentality. That's now changed here, which is great. It's a good move for New Zealand system. But I had to change my mind to go, no, Katie, you need to get healthy first, because only then will you be able to perform better. So it was almost like a breakthrough moment. It was like, okay. And then it was detailing, because I'm a very detailed person and I like to have steps and goals. So it was like, okay, break that down. How do I get healthy? Well, one, I need to get my menstrual cycle back. Well, how do I do that? Well, let's start introducing more carbohydrates. Let's start introducing more energy throughout the day. Let's reduce your training load. which for an athlete is quite hard to do, is like,
Yes.
peel back the training, peel it back. And you're like, no, I need to train more. But working with a sports psych, it's like, right, let's just spend a month. It's only a month. It's not going to hurt you. A month of, better fueling, reducing training load, let the body recover. And that was hugely beneficial. I started sleeping a lot better. My acne around my jawline cleared up because I had so much of a hormonal imbalance. My estrogen was like flatlined, and that's why I wasn't getting my menstrual cycle. So the biggest part was fueling more, and that was a little bit of a barrier, I will be honest. But when you start to feel and see the gains of, you're actually feeling better, and it was almost like I was on rocket fuel, because I was sleeping better, I was eating better, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm this happy person. Like, where was she, for 3 years? Because it kind of wasn't till I was out of everything that I was like, man, I think I was really depressed that whole time. And I think because that was my normal. And then when it was like, boom, oh, there's Katie again. Oh, she's got her spark back. Oh, she's dancing around the living room again. What's this? So, I mean, it took time. Like, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It took time. And it was very courageous. I look back at it, and I'm very courageous to step out of the program and still fight to get back into the program. And that was my goal. I want to go back to a world champs and race in a world champs. So yeah.
And did you?
Well, I did. Yeah. So pretty much what would have been 15 months after my contract got stopped, I was racing a world champs again.
Fantastic. That sounds like a pretty quick turnaround.
Yeah. And I take that to the support group that I had, for sure.
I also want to ask about some of the long-term effects of being like in a state of LEA. I know that like this is something that it came up on a call the other day, and I know that we don't often talk about, but people can end up in the bigger picture with like bone density issues. What are the things that can, if someone doesn't catch it quickly and ends up, underfueled for years on years, what are some of the long-term effects?
Yeah, so years on years, you said it right, like bone health is probably the one that gets impacted the most. And we see this in patients that suffer from anorexia. So that's kind of the only long-term data you can really draw on.
Interesting. There's no long-term data around like endocrine health or the other things that you mentioned.
Well, not in terms of, as a lens of LEA RED-S.
Right. Yeah.
So that's where you kind of go to the literature, because anorexia has been around for a very long time, and that's at the very extreme end, I would say. So yeah, we're talking about bone health. When we're underfueling, we might be suppressing hormones, and those hormones are really valuable for maintaining and building bone. And our bone is always changing. It's always breaking down and building back up. It's a living tissue. And so if we're not fueling enough, then that bone is not going to be building up. It's just going to keep breaking down. And so that's when we see individuals that will have poor bone density. And, I've seen athletes who are in their 20s and they have the bone health of someone who's in their 80s because they're not fueling enough. And that does depend on the sport too. So if you're in sports like cycling, which is non-weight bearing, they're more at risk of having low bones because they don't have that constant impact like that you do. And bone responds to impact and stress. So it will get stronger with impact and stress. So that's where runners can fall into the category of having repeated stress fractures, but they might be borderline on having poor bone health because they have that repetitive impact, but it will catch up to them, and
Right.
underfueling you'll keep having stress fractures and then maybe a bone break, and then it's like, gosh, you've got poor bone health. So that's probably the biggest one that will play out chronically. It's not well researched or out there from my understanding, but a medical doctor and reproductive might be able to answer this better. But I've just heard of accounts where female athletes have struggled to get pregnant, and it's not until they put on more body mass or body fat to allow pregnancy to happen. So that could be a long-term consequence. But I think what is really, really exciting is that LEA and RED-S can be reversed.
Mm-hmm.
There might be some long-term health complications that you still might be struggling with, but for majority of people you can recover from it. It's just having more of an understanding of how to feel your training, how do you feel being healthy, working with a registered sports nutritionist or a dietitian, getting bloods done regularly to make sure everything's ticking along. If you do have barriers to food or body image, and it's like talking to people about that and normalizing it and just getting more of an understanding of what are triggers. Is it stress? Is it looking on social media? I like young girls growing up today, gosh, phones, it's challenging, and I'm sure you've come through that yourself, Sarah.
Yeah. Well, I know, with my daughter, it's interesting because she's it's like it's almost a different generation because she has access all the time, right? So she also has access to this conversation, right?
True.
About so I find that very interesting, is that as much as she sees something about, as much as she would see, say, images of women in a sort of in a perfectionist way, right?
Mm-hmm.
She also sees the conversation about how women are portrayed happening on the internet, right?
That's
so
very true.
It's kind of interesting. So she'll say, oh, I saw something. She said this to me a couple months ago. I saw something that I read something about how women are sometimes valued. Now I'm putting words in her mouth because this is not how she would have said it because she's 11, but she's that women are valued in our culture based on how they look. Do you think that that's true? Right? So she was putting it back to me, she had seen this thing and she was kind of taken aback by it. Am I valued on how I look? So we were able to have that whole conversation, right? Which is interesting because she's getting the layers of the conversation because she has almost so much, so much access to the internet, So there's good and bad to that. I think with her generation, and I love that she still brings me those kinds of conversations.
Yeah, that's great.
Mm-hmm. And you work with clients now, am I right? How do you work with people?
Yeah, I am all online. That's the way of it now. So mostly, people just find me on Instagram of all places, or word of mouth, and just say, hey, I might be struggling with, being really tired, or finding that they just lose appetite before or after trainings and know that they need to be feeling better. So they'll come to me and I'll just work with them on a few key areas with their goals and get them on their way. So yeah, it's mainly nutrition. I do have a background in exercise science and physiology, so have helped a few athletes with programming for a few events, but most of my stuff is sports nutrition.
Right. And do you have some success stories to share?
Success stories. I guess I haven't had like anyone with severe LEA or RED-S, but I've had people that definitely are underfueling after I talk to them and analyze foods. And it's kind of, some are a little bit fearful of carbohydrate intake. We need carbohydrates. It's so important, not only for performance, but for our hormones. And I'll never forget, there was an athlete who was just like, oh my gosh, it's like when I have carbs when I train, it's like I can hit fifth gear. It's so amazing. And it's like, I love those stories because it's such a small tweak and a small change that can make a huge difference. And that's probably majority of the work that I do. Is everyone's doing things quite well, like they're eating the right foods, eating well, but what it is, it's the timing of food, when to have it, and what is best for your session is where I tweak. And makes a big difference, and most of it is on energy levels and the ability to actually push themselves harder in a training session, and then with that comes adaptation, and then with that comes improved performance. So kind of knock-on effect. Yeah.
Right. So if we have listeners who think they may be slightly underfueling, like you said, they may not be full blown into LEA, but they might be, what would be some of the symptoms they would look for that they need to perhaps eat more carbohydrates?
Yeah, great question. So one is fatigue. Like, are you recovering from your training session? So when I say recovering, you're waking up the next day feeling fine. There's no DOMs or like sore muscles. That in the training session itself, if you've got repeated efforts, it's like the fifth one. So you have 5 efforts, 1 and 2 are great, and then 3 is just not good. 4th, you're tailing off, and 5, you're going, is there any point I should be doing this? I don't believe that a session should be like that. I think it should be consistent, and yes, you'll feel fatigue, but it shouldn't just be like a dramatic drop of, I've hit the wall. That's probably more of an in-session fueling thing that you could work on. Sleep is really important. So I find some athletes that are underfueling, they struggle to get to sleep. And that's a signal that, I need more food. My brain is awake. I need more food. Or on the opposite. So this is where it makes it quite challenging, or the opposite is where you just want to sleep all the time. I would say, probably best to go to a doctor and just make sure bloods are fine, that you don't have low iron or low B12 or something like that. What's some others? If you're just getting like repeated illness.
Oh yeah,
is another one.
Good one.
Yeah, I know. Like particularly now with COVID around, there's a lot of viral infections that you're more susceptible to. I know it's particularly here in New Zealand. There's another wave of viral infections going around that's not COVID related. And then another is like repeated injuries. Like if it's every season or a couple, you get injured a couple times in the season, then maybe that's, is that a fueling issue? Is that a training overload issue? It's probably you're not eating enough for the training that you've been given or that you're doing. So those would be kind of the main ones. Or I'll actually add one more because I see it a lot in my clients where they'll have gut discomfort and then they'll decide to take out gluten or dairy because they believe that is the cause of their gut issues.
Right.
It's probably more likely that your gut's not functioning optimally because you're not having enough fuel on board to help mend the gut and make the gut function like it should. And it's probably not a case of removing those items. It's a case of actually let's fix the gut first, and then we'll reintroduce things. Yeah. So I rambled a whole lot there.
No, those are all great. And really, as far as solutions, like you're just, I mean, we're talking about fueling a bit more, for someone who's maybe feeling like a low grade, some of the things you just mentioned, that might be, you tell me, but I'm thinking that might be as simple as like a sports drink during your workout if you don't take one, or eating within your 15-minute recovery window, a couple hundred calories. Like, is that the kind of thing that just can like bump you up?
Yeah. I mean, the biggest thing is fasted morning training sessions. That is rife around all the athletes I talk to. Let's add a snack in before a morning workout. I think that is fantastic, right?
Yeah.
Especially females, we need to break that fast. We don't do well with fasting. So have a snack. And if you're these type of people that just can't eat in the morning, I totally understand that. Have half a banana, a couple bites of banana, or 3 or 4 dates. Put them in your mouth while you're driving to your gym class or something, and then having a good meal after your workouts. So I always try to educate my athletes. If you're doing a session, have something before. If it's longer than an hour, then have a sports drink during, or some solid food during, and then have a good meal after that has some good protein in it. And that way, you're covering your training demands. You can like get more nitty gritty and into it, but that's kind of the general rule of, before and after is like a non-negotiable for me.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Yeah, sometimes I feel like I tell people, because people ask me about this stuff, even though I'm not a trained expert, but after all my 20 years of being a pro athlete, I sometimes tell people, because I live in a world now where I work out once per day. Most of my friends just like generally stay fit in some kind of way by doing an hour of something. For me, that's usually CrossFit or running. But if you're feeling like a slump in the low afternoon or in the late afternoon, in the middle of the afternoon, I'm often like, listen, you're probably not eating enough like carbs right after your workout, right? It's like you might not be sleeping enough. There could be totally other reasons for that afternoon slump, but like part of me is just like, just try eating a bit more, like somewhere around your workout time, get the right fuel in, like you said, have a proper meal and see if that because I think that's a very everyday way that like people will experience a little bit of an energy deficiency, right?
Yeah, for sure. And the 3 p.m. slump or the 3 p.m. sugar crave, that to me is more of a sign, you haven't front loaded enough earlier in the day. And most of those is like come from those individuals that won't eat before a morning CrossFit session and then won't have anything till like lunchtime, and then they get to like 4 or 5 o'clock and they're like, man, I want the chips, I want the chocolate, I want the coffee.
Yeah, exactly. I'm someone who struggles to eat in the morning, especially since I stopped doing elite sport because I'm not so hungry, I'm not working out as much, and I just always carry candy with me. So that's my solution. It's very easy. So that like if mid workout, like you said, you're going through the intervals and like the 4th interval, you're like, I can, then I have like immediate carbohydrate I could take if I need to keep that energy more stable. I know candy is probably not like the first go-to for everybody, but it definitely works for me.
Yeah, it's good. Yeah. And usually like having something liquid based is something that you can get down you to. So that's where I guess a carbohydrate containing drink would be beneficial as well.
Yeah, I also do that sometimes. We have a great sponsor called Prevenix, and I use their sports drink quite a lot as well. Anyway, Katie, I know you said you had to go, so I won't keep you any longer, but thank you so much for all the great information, for telling your story, and for the catch up.
Thank you. Yeah, lovely to see you, and thanks for that.
Mm-hmm.
Enjoyed it. Good chats. We could chat forever.
Wow. Okay. I just want to thank Katie Schofield for her time, for telling her story, and honestly for the way that she was able to give us clear definitions of LEA, of RED-S, and how it plays out. I feel like I came out of that with such a solid understanding of what those things are and how they're playing out. So like, for example, I always thought that running in a caloric deficit just meant that you would lose weight. Like I think I was led to believe that by coaches, and actually, it totally makes sense that if you don't have enough fuel on board, your body has to prioritize that fuel for the exercise you're doing. And then you can actually like start to lose basic body functions, or it affects basic body functions, which like it totally makes sense. I just didn't realize that like weight loss wasn't the first go-to for your body when you were in a caloric deficit necessarily. So when basic functions start to shut down, it again completely like it's like the other shoe's dropping here, where you can end up with a wide range of symptoms that are hard to diagnose, and often go unnoticed or diagnosed for a really long time. If you layer in on there, and this is like a sociocultural piece that I'm only thinking of afterwards, but if you layer in there the fact that we know that often women's discomfort and pain isn't believed as much by medical professionals, I'm guessing that is also true for coaches and other healthcare providers as it relates to sport. I also thought it was interesting that this basically can happen to anyone. Like you can, like in Katie's story, it was her perfectionism and her focus on elite sport and the desire to succeed and the desire for performance that led her into a state of low energy availability and then eventually RED-S. And I think that's also extremely relatable when we actually literally we don't have the information, we don't know what to do, and we don't know how to fuel ourselves well. I was also buoyed by how Katie was talking about some of her clients and how they feel when they do fuel properly. That's definitely been my experience. And sometimes it's as simple as just eating more, or for some of us eating more carbohydrates. If we've had that messaging that carbohydrates are like some kind of evil macro that will make us put on weight. And then also how if our health improves, if we eat more and our health improves, our training sessions will also improve and ultimately become more effective, making you a better athlete. So I, for one, am super stoked to be able to continue to share information about proper fueling for the next 2 weeks through all the Feisty channels. So thank you for listening today to Katie, and thank you for joining us for that journey. I have one request before we go from our listeners. I noticed that Katie's Instagram, which is athlete.nutrition.katie, has 990 followers as of today. So I'm hoping that some of you will just grab your phone right now. You might be listening on your phone. Just grab it. Go to Athlete Nutrition Katie and give her a follow. I'm sure Katie would love to jump over that 1K mark. And I would love for our listeners to be part of it. So thank you so much for being here today, for listening. I appreciate each and every one of you. And I look forward to being back here with you in November. As we head into summer, rest and recovery are critical for improving sports performance, reducing stress, and living a long and healthy life. We should all invest in better sleep. So, think about the thing you lay your head on for 8 hours a night. If it's not exactly right for you, it can lead to needless tossing and turning, or worse, have you waking up with an unrelenting kink in your neck. My new Lagoon pillow has helped me improve my sleep immensely by pairing me with the performance pillow that has everything I need. So I personally was matched with the Otter pillow. Shout out to Team Otter, which I love because it has a gentle cooling effect. And I was able to choose how much stuffing I wanted in it, which is super important to me because I'm doing a decent amount of CrossFit these days and my shoulders are kind of creaky. So having a pillow that is stuffed just to the right height keeps my neck and head in exactly the right position and comfortable for the entire night. And as of fall 2023, Lagoon launched their 100% mulberry silk pillowcases. It's cool to the touch, buttery soft, and great for your skin and hair. You've got to go check out this pillowcase if you want to feel great and look great every morning. Waking up for morning workouts has never felt better. I'm refreshed and pain-free thanks to my Lagoon pillow. To check it out for yourself, go to lagoonsleep.com/performance and take the 2-minute sleep quiz to find your perfect pillow match. And then use the code PERFORMANCE for 15% off your first purchase. That's code PERFORMANCE at lagoonsleep.com/performance, whole 15% off, and the link is in the show notes. You can just click through there. As a lifelong runner and triathlete turned CrossFitter, I am stoked to announce that the athletic eyewear brand Tifosi Optics has joined us as a partner here at Feisty Media. Tifosi sports glasses hit all the marks for athletes. They're shatterproof polybicarbonate, so the lenses not only reduce glare, but also offer scratch resistance, which I 100% need. They stay in place when you are moving. The hydrophilic rubber nose pads actually get more grippy the more you sweat, so they are secure and don't slide down your face even when you're running in hot conditions. No matter what sport you do, Tifosi has shades for you. Whether you love tennis, fishing, pickleball, running, cycling, or just hanging out on the beach. They are super reasonably priced, which I love, so I can have multiple pairs that go with any outfit. And of course, Feisty listeners get a special discount. So head on over to tifosioptics.com and use the code FM20. FM as in Feisty Media to get 20% off your order. That's FM20 at tifosioptics.com. I'll put a link in the show notes to make it easy for you. Building muscle can be tough, and gains can be so slow, even for those of us who do a lot of strength training. As an ex-endurance athlete who is now in perimenopause, I know this all too well. It can be frustrating to put in the time in the gym and not see the results I'm looking for. That's why it's super important to take the right supplements at the right time. One of those supplements is essential amino acids, which are needed to trigger muscle protein synthesis. Muscle protein synthesis happens when you eat high-quality protein, like eggs or whey. And by supplementing with additional essential amino acids, you can make sure you are getting the full benefit of your training sessions. Targeted essential amino acid formulas can be up to 4 times more effective than just eating protein. I've been taking amino acids for almost a year, and in combination with eating quality protein and a couple other supplements, I have managed to turn the tides on age-related muscle loss, which starts at 30 for women, by the way, and I have continued to make strength gains as I head towards 50. AminoCo has been a long-time sponsor of Feisty Media and has supported all of our brands and podcasts over the years. I recommend starting with AminoCo Perform, and you can grab some at aminoco.com/performance. If you enter the code PERFORMANCE, you will save 30% and receive a free gift if it is your first purchase. Give it a try and let me know how it goes. That's aminoco.com/performance and use the code PERFORMANCE to save 30%.